Learn Japanese history.
We are your navigators, Taro and Hanako.
Welcome, everyone. We're diving into a really pivotal time in Japanese history today.
That's right, the Mongol invasions of the 13th century, a period of massive upheaval.
Yeah, huge changes. We're going to look at what led up to it, the invasions themselves, and maybe most importantly, the impact, right? Especially on the samurai.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And how the Kamakura shogunate, the government at the time, how they handled it all. It's quite a story.
Okay, let's set the scene. Before Japan was even on their radar, what was going on with the Mongol Empire? They weren't exactly small players.
No, definitely not. The Mongol Empire under Genghis Khan and then his successors was just, exploding across Asia in the 13th century. Unbelievable speed.
Right.
By the time we're talking about, it's Genghis's grandson, Kublai Khan, who's in charge, and he'd already conquered huge areas.
Like where specifically?
Well, the Jin dynasty in northern China was gone, and Goryeo, that's Korea, was subjugated under Mongol control.
Okay, so Korea being under their thumb is key context for Japan, isn't it?
Absolutely crucial. And Kublai didn't just stop there. He moved the capital to Dadu, that's modern Beijing, and declared his own dynasty in China, the Yuan dynasty.
So a massive consolidated power right next door.
Precisely. And his gaze naturally turned towards, Japan.
Now, before this threat really materialized, what was Japan's connection like with the continent? Were they isolated?
Not at all, actually. There was already quite a bit of trade going on, especially with the Southern Song dynasty in China. This wasn't new. It had been happening even before the Kamakura shogunate fully consolidated power.
Okay, so ships were going back and forth.
Regularly, carrying all sorts of goods.
Like what kind of stuff? What were they importing?
Japan was bringing in things like books, incense, the aromatic kind, medicines, really nice ceramics.
High-value goods, then.
Yeah, and interestingly, a lot of Song coins, they actually circulated quite widely in Japan, which shows a pretty strong economic link.
And what was Japan sending back?
They were exporting resources. Things like gold, mercury, sulfur, timber, stuff the mainland valued.
So this established trade.
Right.
How did the Kamakura shogunate view it when they first took charge? Were they keen on it?
Well, initially, their main focus was internal power, getting control of Japan itself. So foreign trade wasn't top priority.
Makes sense.
But as things stabilized, they saw the benefits, the economic advantages. And as Japan's own ports and sea routes developed, you saw more Chinese ships arriving, even in Kamakura itself, more goods flowing in.
It feels like Japan was getting pulled more into that wider East Asian network.
Definitely. And then you have someone like Marco Polo writing about Japan around this time.
Ah, yes, the famous European traveler. What did he say? Does his account fit with this picture of trade?
It's fascinating. Marco Polo was traveling in the late 13th century, right when these invasions were happening or being planned. His book, The Travels of Marco Polo, gives this incredible description of Japan, which he called Sipangu.
Incredible in what way? Was it accurate?
Well, that's the question. He paints this picture of Japan as a land of just unbelievable wealth. Especially gold.
Gold?
Yeah, he claimed gold was everywhere, that they had limitless amounts. He even suggested, kind of incorrectly, that no foreigners had ever reached Japan, which is why they supposedly had so much gold it had never left.
Which we know wasn't true because of the Song trade.
Exactly. But his stories were powerful. He described this magnificent palace, supposedly covered roof to floor in solid gold.
Seriously, a gold palace.
That's what he wrote. Gold roof, gold floors, gold windows. Everything gold. And beyond gold, he talked about tons of pearls, including these big pinkish ones and other jewels, just immense, almost mythical wealth.
Wow. That description must have really caught people's attention back in Europe, and maybe Kublai Khan's attention, too.
It's possible those tales played a part, or maybe it was just pure imperial ambition. But yes, Kublai Khan decided he wanted Japan to acknowledge his authority.
How did he go about that? Just demand it?
Pretty much. He sent envoys multiple times demanding Japan send tribute missions. Basically become a vassal state like Goryeo.
Okay.
Acknowledge the Yuan dynasty's superiority.
And knowing the Kamakura shogunate, I imagine that didn't go down well.
Not at all. The regent at the time was Hojo Tokimun, a very strong figure. And he, along with the shogunate, flatly refused.
Just said no.
Consistently. They saw it as an insult, a threat to their independence. And this defiance, this refusal to bow down, is what ultimately pushed Kublai Khan towards invasion.
Okay, so that leads us to 1274, the first invasion, the Bunai invasion. What happened?
Right. In 1274, a combined Mongol and Goryeo force, remember, Korea was under their control, landed first on Tsushima and Iki Islands.
Stepping stones to the mainland.
Exactly. Then they hit Hakata Bay in northern Kyushu, and their way of fighting was very different from what the Japanese samurai were used to.
How so?
They used loud drums and gongs, probably for signaling and intimidation. They had poison arrows. They used gunpowder weapons bombs or projectiles, and they fought in disciplined groups, coordinated formations.
Which must have been a shock for the samurai, right? Weren't they more about individual combat, duels?
Very much so. Samurai warfare traditionally emphasized individual skill and bravery, seeking out worthy opponents. Facing coordinated volleys of arrows, bombs, and disciplined infantry was deeply unsettling and difficult to counter initially.
So how did the Japanese forces react?
They struggled. Their tactics weren't effective against the Mongol formations. The main Japanese forces actually had to pull back towards Zaifu, the regional government center.
But the Mongols didn't press the advantage.
No, they withdrew. Accounts suggest they took losses, maybe had supply issues, or perhaps internal disagreements within the command. Whatever the reason, they sailed back to the mainland.
So a Japanese victory. Or more like the Mongols just left.
A bit of both, perhaps. Japan survived the first round, but Kublai Khan wasn't someone who gave up easily?
No, I guess not. So he came back.
Oh, yes. After he finished conquering the Southern Song dynasty in China, which gave him even more resources, he launched a second, much larger invasion in 1281. This is the Korean invasion.
Bigger fleet, more soldiers.
Significantly bigger. This was meant to be decisive. Assert Yuan authority once and for all.
But Japan was ready this time, or better prepared.
They had learned lessons, definitely. They built this long stone wall, the Seikiroi, along Hakata Bay to make landings harder.
Ah, the wall. I've read about that.
Yeah, a major defensive work. And they mobilized a huge number of samurai, not just from Kyushu, but from all over Japan. So when the Yuan fleet arrived, they faced this wall and determined resistance.
And then the weather played a role. The famous storm.
Crucially, yes. A massive typhoon hit the fleet. While the term kamikaze, or divine wind, gets used a lot later, especially in the 20th century, the storm itself was undeniably real and devastating.
Right, the ships.
Caused immense damage. Combined with the strong Japanese defense, it crippled the invasion. The Yuan forces suffered catastrophic losses and were defeated.
So, Japanese defense and a timely typhoon. It's interesting how these events get named over time, too. You mentioned kamikaze later, but what were they called back then?
Good question. At the time, people used pretty straightforward terms like Mongol invasion, Mongol war, maybe foreign enemy war, simple descriptions.
Okay.
The term Yuan invasion, Genkō in Japanese, became more common later. It was used in a big history project, the Dainihan Shi, during the Edo period.
And then it really took off.
Yeah, especially with rising nationalism in the Meiji era and then during World War II. Genkō got tied up with the whole divine wind narrative, Japan being divinely protected.
But historians now tend to use.
More recently, you see a return to Mongol invasion or Mongol incursion, trying to be a bit more neutral, perhaps, and focus on the Mongol aspect.
Fascinating how naming reflects changing perspectives. So, stepping back, why did these massive Yuan invasions ultimately fail? Was it just the storm?
The storm was huge, especially the second time. But it wasn't the only factor. The Yuan forces, despite being powerful on land, really lacked large-scale naval warfare experience. Invading an island is tricky.
Right.
And remember, their army wasn't just Mongols. It included many soldiers from conquered places like Goryeo and southern China. Their commitment might have been questionable.
Okay, internal factors too.
Yeah.
And on the Japanese side.
The samurai fought incredibly hard. The Gokunin, the direct vassals of the shogun, were defending their homes, their lands, their way of life. Their motivation was strong.
And the shogunate learned from the first invasion.
Definitely. They didn't just sit back after 1274. They strengthened defenses, reinforced the guard duty system in the Ikoku Banyaku, and even mobilized warriors who weren't direct vassals. They also set up a stronger regional command in the west, the Shinsei Tandai. They were preparing for a possible third round.
It really paints a picture of resilience. You mentioned the Gokunin. We actually have an amazing source from one of them, don't we? Takazaki Suinaga.
Yes, the Mongol invasion picture scroll. It's incredible. Commissioned by Takazaki Suinaga himself, a Gokunin from Higo province.
And it shows his personal experience.
Exactly. It depicts his actions in the battles. He was clearly very brave, maybe a bit reckless, and then his whole struggle afterwards to get recognized and rewarded by the shogunate.
Rewards were a big deal, weren't they? Why was that so critical for the samurai?
Absolutely fundamental. These rewards, Ansho, weren't just pats on the back. They were tangible compensation, often land grants for their service. Remember, samurai paid for their own horses, armor, weapons, supplies. Campaigning was expensive.
Ah, okay. So no reward meant financial hardship.
Big time. Especially after something like the Bunai invasion, which put a huge strain on everyone. Without Ansho, they couldn't maintain their status or be ready for the next call to arms.
What does the scroll show about Suenaga's fighting?
It shows him really eager to get into the thick of it, charging ahead, wanting to be first. There's a dramatic scene where his horse gets shot by an arrow. You really feel the danger he was in.
Wow. And after surviving all that, getting rewarded wasn't automatic.
Not for him, apparently. There was a process: report your deeds to your commander, who reports up the chain to the samurai office in Kamakura. But Suenaga waited and heard nothing.
So what did he do?
He decided to go to Kamakura himself. He actually had to sell his horse's saddle to afford the trip. He was determined either get his reward or become a monk.
That's commitment. Did it work?
It wasn't easy. He had trouble getting anyone to listen at first, but he was persistent and managed to get a direct audience with Adachi Yasumori, who was in charge of rewards.
A top guy.
Pretty much. Sunaga pleaded his case, told his story, and convinced Yasumori. He was granted Haito village in Higo.
Success?
Yes. And apparently, while lots of people got rewards that day, Suenaga's was presented by Yasumori, which was a big deal for him, likely why he commissioned the scroll later to document his valor and his hard-won recognition.
What a story. It gives such a personal view. But looking bigger picture, what were the long-term consequences of these invasions for Japan, for the Gokunin class as a whole?
They were huge, and mostly negative for the Gokunin. The biggest problem was that the shogunate couldn't reward everyone properly.
Because there was no enemy land in Japan to confiscate and give out.
Exactly. Unlike after a civil war, there were no spoils to distribute. So thousands of warriors who fought bravely, spent their own money, got little or nothing. This caused a lot of resentment and economic hardship.
And politically, did it change the shogunate?
Yes. Power became much more concentrated in the hands of the main Hojo family line, the Tokuso. It shifted from a system needing Gokunin cooperation to more autocratic rule.
How did that play out?
The Muchibito, the Hojo's personal retainers, became much more powerful, often ignoring the needs of the wider Gokunin class. Adachi Yasumori, the guy who rewarded Suenaga, was himself a powerful Gokunin, but he was later overthrown by a Muchibito representative. That event really marked the peak of Tokusa power.
So the Gokunin were squeezed politically and economically.
Very much so. Smaller landholders had to sell or mortgage their lands to cover invasion costs, and inheritance practices often split lands further.
Did the shogunate try to help?
They did issue the Einin Reforms Einin no Tokusere in 1297. It was meant to cancel debts and return land to original Gokunin owners.
Does it work?
Not really, not long term. It was more of a temporary fix. The underlying problems remained.
So how did the Gokunin adapt if the system wasn't supporting them?
They had to find ways. Some shifted to single heir inheritance, usually the eldest son, to stop land being divided. They also focused more on strengthening local ties, becoming more embedded in their own regions.
Okay, so the established warrior class is struggling. But this period also sees new groups emerging, right? The Ikuko.
That's right. Especially in the Kinai region near the capital, you get these new warrior groups, sometimes called Shinzei-bushi, popping up.
And they become known as Akuto. What were they doing?
They were often involved in the growing commercial economy. They'd contract to collect taxes on estates for absentee landlords or engage in money-lending concierge. This let them build up wealth.
But they caused trouble.
Their methods could be forceful. They clashed with peasant communities, sometimes seized control of estates. This put them at odds with the estate owners and the shogunate. Hence the name Akuto. It means villains or outlaws.
So they were just criminals.
It's more complex. They were disruptive, yes, but also influential. They built networks, sometimes drawing and struggling Gokunin. They even formed connections with powerful temples or figures at court.
What made them different from, say, the Eastern Gokunin?
Well, the shogunate's control was always stronger in the East. In the West, some warrior families had declined after earlier conflicts, like the Jokyu War. These Akuto often emerged from that less controlled environment. They were more entrepreneurial, maybe.
How so?
They were involved in diverse activities: deputy land stewards, tax farming, money lending. Their operations could span multiple estates, even provinces. Some had links to bandits or pirates. They tended to act in groups, focused on profit. They were sometimes called tokusei jakusha, those who understood profit.
Can you give an example?
There's an account from Harima province around 1300. It describes Akuto initially looking quite distinct, maybe unusual clothing. Later, they're depicted with large retinues, flashy armor, raiding estates. Interestingly, even if they came from outside, they could gain support from many local warriors. You sometimes see unusual figures in art from the period, like the Yuzu Nenbutsu Enji Imaki scroll, that hints at these non-traditional warrior types.
So it really feels like the Mongol invasions were a massive catalyst.
Definitely, not just a military event, but something that accelerated deep changes in Japanese society, exposed weaknesses, created new pressures, and allowed new groups like the Akuto to rise.
So as you can see, the Mongol invasions were far more than just military conflicts. They were a major catalyst for significant changes within Japanese society, exposing weaknesses within the Kamakura shogunate and contributing to the rise of new social and economic forces.
Absolutely. From the bravery of individual samurai like Takazaki Suenaga, his personal struggle, to the broader shifts in political power and the emergence of these entrepreneurial groups like the Akuto, this period offers a fascinating lens through which to understand the evolving landscape of medieval Japan.
We hope this deep dive has given you some valuable insights into this really critical era. What aspects stood out to you? Maybe the economic pressures or the rise of the Akuta?
Yeah, or maybe Suenaga's personal quest for recognition. There are so many layers here.
It's definitely a period packed with compelling stories and consequences that lasted for centuries. We really encourage you to dig deeper, if anything sparked your curiosity.
There's always more to uncover, but for now, until our next exploration, sayonara.